Protesters from London asked me to send them a manuscript of a speech I wrote that you will hear in a minute. Cubans and Venezuelans stood in front of the Cuban embassy in London, and the manuscript was read over a loudspeaker. I ask all of you, after listening to the speech, to forward it to all your family and friends, and for them to do the same, so the entire world will know and understand what the Cuban tyranny is all about, and how Cubans on the island are forced to live. All who wish to have the manuscript for publication or to read it in front of the embassy around the world, contact me through Facebook so I can send it to you. My name is Orestes Matacena. As you can see, it is spelled differently from the way it's pronounced. It is an Italian last name pronounced Matacena. Matacena. I'm an actor, director, writer, and film producer in Hollywood. I'm not a politician, nor I want to be one. I'm busy enough with my profession, believe me. What I'm interested in as a Cuban and one who loves freedom without conditions is a Cuban nation to be truly free. And I expect that the day the tyranny is removed from Cuba, the following government leaders will understand what liberty means. There is only one way to be free. We may not like the idea of a Cuban citizen burning their Cuban flag, but if a Cuban wants to do that on his own soil, he should have the absolute right and freedom if he so chooses. Since the Independence War or Spanish-American War, whoever dares to burn the flag is sentenced to jail in Cuba. That is not freedom. I am sure that most people in the world want liberty for their country and themselves. That is the right of every human being. In the United States, a country that can teach us lessons of freedom, any citizen can burn their flag or wipe their asses with it. Never in 238 years of independence have they had a single dictator, much less a tyrant. Instead, Cuba, from 1902 until now, that is 112 years, we have had a few dictators and tyrants. As you can see, freedom with conditions does not make a free country. What I just said is just food for thought and for future government leaders. Another very important thing that I would like all who are listening to me to do is to visit a Facebook page I created and click like, and tell your family and friends to do the same. The page is called Army Without Soldiers, Only Generals. I want millions of people to be friends or followers of this page. I want you all to be part of this Army Without Soldiers, Only Generals, and be one of the generals too. Mr. Ambassador of Cuba and the rest of the UK Foreign Office in London, we respectfully ask you on this historic day of the 1st of April 2014 to join with the majority of the Cuban people who want and demand the right to be free and to condemn the tyrant Raúl Castro, his brother ex-tyrant Fidel Castro, and the rest of his henchmen for destroying the Cuban island, not only the physical but also the moral fabric of the whole nation. It is inconceivable to hear in a free country anywhere in the world that by day Cuban teachers educate children and at night they become prostitutes and sell their bodies to support their family. It is inconceivable for a citizen living in a free country that his family would encourage him to prostitute himself with tourists for a couple of dollars to put a meal on the table. There is no way to understand how a mother can tell her children to steal at their jobs in order to sell the items on the black market for Cuban pesos that are worthless to put a plate of food on the table. It is completely inconceivable. The rest of the embassy very well know that sadness is the pure reality. You also may have sin in order to feed your family and loved ones. Ambassador of the beautiful and destroyed island of Cuba, it is very probable that what I have said is what you have lived in your own flesh. But even more sad is what Forbes magazine published in an article dated May 5th, 2006, called Fortunes of Kings, Queens, and Dictators. Forbes ranked Fidel Castro 7th in a group of 10 leaders of the world with high positions and vast fortunes. The magazine estimated the personal fortune of ex-tyrant Fidel Castro to be $900 million, almost doubling the $500 million of Queen Elizabeth and a little less than that of Prince Albert of Monaco, who is estimated at $1 billion. And the Cubans on the island live in misery of biblical proportions. This, Mr. Ambassador, is unquestionably an undeniable and absolute crisp sadness that you and the rest of the embassy must understand. This blockade, the current tyrant Raul Castro and his brother ex-tyrant Fidel Castro and his henchmen say it is the reason why Cuba suffers in this misery that has existed for the past 55 years. You, Mr. Ambassador, know perfectly well that this is another lie of gigantic proportions. You, being a cultured individual and part of the regime's machinery, not government, tyrannical regime, knows that a blockade means putting a block of 15 aircraft carriers of the U.S. Armed Forces around the island where they do not allow anything in or out of Cuba. That's what a blockade is, and you know this very well. The Cuban tyranny trades with the entire world, including the United States and Great Britain. And the poor and helpless Cuban people continue to live in misery while the tyrants and their henchmen and children and the rest of their families live like kings, where they themselves do not obey the very laws that the tyrannical regime has imposed on their Cuban slaves. But as if that were not enough, the tyrant and his henchmen laugh at the noble and enslaved Cuban people, installing luxury car dealers where an enslaved doctor has to supplement his $20 a month income by working as a cab driver. According to the two old brothers and old tyrants, they converted the Cuban island into a terrestrial paradise where the Cuban people have been liberated from Yankee imperialism. During the last 55 years of a glorious terrestrial paradise created by the revolution, the Cuban people have been and will be the sole absolute owners of the island. Mr. Ambassador, tell me why, if that is so, Cubans living in the island cannot enter the hotels. They cannot shop in stores where only hierarchy members of the revolution and certain families like yours, Mr. Ambassador, can. Tell me, Mr. Ambassador, tell me why the humble people of Cuba cannot go to those places. Why do those humble Cubans, which have been the owners of Cuba during the last 55 years of tyranny, may not enter those centers? Tell me why. Tell me, Mr. Ambassador, why tens of thousands of Cubans died escaping in boats, risking their lives in search of freedom in the United States. Tell me why. Tell me why. Tell me, Mr. Ambassador, why tourists from all over the world love to go to Cuba. You know better than anyone else why. Now I'm going to tell you another why of the why Cubans on the island no longer want to be slaves of the tyrant and his henchmen. Because they got tired of telling their underage sons and daughters to participate in sex orgies with white men and white women, black women and black men, Chinese men and Chinese women, Italians, Canadians, Americans, Russians and Bulgarians, fat women and skinny men, fat men and skinny women, and old men and old women, reeking of cheap perfume from foreign lands for a handful of dollars, contributing even more to the physical and moral fabric and decay of the Cuban youth and the entire nation. Tell me, Mr. Ambassador, why all nations of the world function with a single currency, and Cuba, with its completely destroyed economy, has two types of currency? Perhaps some fantastic invention of Cuban economists we do not know about? The answer to that is my silence. Tyrants Castro and all their henchmen are, to put it in two words only, human mistakes. Mr. Ambassador, we ask you and the rest of the embassy to join us in freeing Cuba from 55 years of tyranny. Your action will make countries all over the world know that Cubans living on the island have been slaves of a tyrant and henchman for generations, and it is a universal major crime to remain silent about this Caribbean Holocaust. Cubans living on the island have every right to be free and prosperous. You and all the members of the embassy are part of those Cubans. Join the liberation of Cuba this 1st of April 2014. 55 years ago, the brothers Castro seized power from dictator Fulgencio Batista, and the Cuban people opened their arms unanimously to the group of young people who promised to reestablish democracy in the country. Cuba at this time enjoyed one of the most powerful and successful economies in the world, despite being a small island in the Caribbean. When the leader of all leaders was giving his first speech to the Cuban people in early January 1959, thousands of doves were released in a peace ceremony near Fidel Castro. The doves flew free in all directions, except one that landed on the shoulder of the young Fidel as he delivered his famous speech, "Weapons, what for? To disarm the Cuban people." Thousands of Cubans gathered to listen to his speech. Another few million more watched on television, thinking that the dove was the Holy Ghost, who was perched on his shoulder to bless him. And millions of Cubans began to worship the leader of all leaders. What the naive and young Cubans did not know was that the dove that landed on the shoulder of Fidel Castro was an invention created by the Bolsheviks in 1917, where the dove's crop is filled with lead so it cannot fly and lands on the nearest place, in this case, the tyrant's shoulder. Mr. Ambassador, it was said that it was impossible for a black man to be president of the United States, and a black man was elected for 2 terms. It was said that the British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher would not send the English Navy to rescue the Falkland Island territory occupied by Argentina. And it was rescued. It was said that the Egyptians could not remove their tyrant that overpowered them for decades. And 17 million Egyptians went into the streets, and the tyrant was removed. It was said that Gandhi would not be able to free India from the British colony, but he did. It was said that Hitler would win World War II. But he lost. It was said that the Roman Empire never would end. But it did. It was said that a couple of students, one American and one Russian who emigrated to the United States, could not create Google. But they created it. It was said that Facebook would not work. But it is working. It was said to be impossible for a giant aircraft to fly all over the world, but thousands of them do, day and night. It was said that mankind could not go to the moon, but they did. It was said to be impossible for Bill Gates to quit school and from the garage of his parents' house be able to create Windows and the Microsoft empire. But he did. It was said that the day that Jesus Christ was crucified, everyone would forget about him. But nobody forgot. It was said that Muhammad would not influence 1 billion men, women, and children. But he did. It was said that no one would buy things through the internet, and the Cuban-American Jeff Bezos created Amazon, where 1.5 million people buy all sorts of things every hour. It was said that the Ukrainian people could not get rid of their government that they themselves elected when the government chose to attach their country to Russia. They went into the streets burning entire cities, and the government was replaced. It was said that the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe could not break free from communism, but when President Ronald Reagan delivered his speech in front of the Berlin Wall, where he said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall," the wall fell and communism ceased to exist in those countries. When Venezuelans got rid of living under the beginnings of a tyranny, millions of young people threw themselves into the streets of Simon Bolivar in protest and will not stop until the removal of their wannabe tyrant who wants to enslave them. As you see, Mr. Ambassador, many supposedly impossible things to achieve have been incorrectly predicted. Thanks to positive men and women with a vision and determined to achieve their goals with their individualistic ingenuity, they made the impossible possible. Mr. Ambassador, I want to tell you that last February I created an army without soldiers, where only generals belong, where the individualistic ingenuity of each general creates and does whatever is necessary to remove the tyrannical cancer that has consumed Cuba and which is trying to consume Venezuela, many other Latin American countries, and other countries all over the world. Already in this army without soldiers, only generals, thousands of men and women joined since its founding only a few weeks ago. And I can assure you, Mr. Ambassador, that within a very short time, millions of generals will join in, using their individualistic ingenuity to overthrow any tyrant who wants to enslave a country. So prepare yourself, because even your army of soldiers with generals will become generals of our army without soldiers. The Castro tyrants took everything from the Cuban people, I admit, Mr. Ambassador. They took everything from them, even their fear. Mr. Ambassador, I want you to know that no one from dissident organizations within the enslaved island and free organizations from abroad have had the balls or the vagina to establish a specific date and exact hour to work for a well-defined common goal, because their fear that it might not happen as expected terrifies them. So, well, the fear has ended now. The social media and the thousands of individuals who are working towards removing the tyrant and his henchmen from Havana's presidential palace have said enough is enough of fears. Now, finally, there is a simple goal to attain. We all understand. Intelligent people and idiots, young and old, black and white, lesbians and homosexuals, Cuban Chinese men and Cuban Chinese women, mulatto men and mulatto women, foreigners and even extraterrestrials, that a national strike and civil disobedience in Cuba will begin April 1st, 2014 at 12 o'clock noontime. Only the ones who will not know are the people who died last February. Hear me well. No organization, whichever it is, will dictate what needs to be done to any of the individuals who are working and putting a grain of sand to eradicate slavery from Cuban soil. Being free, it is not easy, but it is more difficult to be a slave of a tyrant. As individuals who are working to make the impossible possible, we'll open our arms and welcome all those organizations to join us and help reach the goal that everyone unanimously wants to happen. Because if they are creating obstacles and excuses for it not to happen, these organizations will have to answer to the Cuban people if it fails. So join us or shut up and get out of the way so others can free your country from the tyrant and henchmen for you. Señor Embajador and embassy members, if you do not join us as dignified Cubans, as all of you should be, to free Cuba from the tyrant and his henchmen, report to the tyrant Raúl Castro that Cubans will no longer be his slaves. And if this 1st of April we cannot meet our desired goal of at least 5 million Cubans marching in the streets or staying home in protest, the battle is not lost, and the war much less, because every 1st of the month at 12 noon, the Cubans living on the island, if they don't want to be slaves, will know that that's the time set for a national strike and civil disobedience in Cuba. Mr. Ambassador and rest of the embassy, unite with us to win Cuba's freedom, for a Cuba that is your homeland too. Because today is the beginning of the real end of the Castro tyranny that has castrated and debilitated the entire Cuban island and its people over the last 55 years. Listen well. No more. No more.